Hello, welcome to yet another episode of Beyond the Present podcast. My name is Daniel Morgan. I'm here joined live by Poujix from Toronto. Hey there, my man. How's it going?
Everything's awesome, man. How are you?
I am doing terrific. And we have Emmy back for yet another episode. Emmy, how's it going?
Hey, doing great. Happy to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And guess what? We have Emmy here today because, as you might not have guessed probably, Emmy is a vegetarian. So, Emmy, today's topic is about vegetarianism as well as other types of diet, whether perhaps it is special or not. So, you, as far as I'm concerned, you are a vegetarian. Am I right?
Yes.
So, would you explain for how long you've been a vegetarian and why you decided to become a vegetarian in the first place?
Being a vegetarian, just I guess in the most general thing is just to not eat meat or anything like any kind of animal meat. So that could include like chickens, cow, cattle, pork. I mean, there's very different many forms. Like you could say pescatarian, they eat no meat except fish. There's vegans, which eat no product that comes from an animal at all.
Wow.
And then there's like even more, I guess, extreme forms, like a raw vegan doesn't have any cooked vegetables, but they're very different, like reasonings. And I guess why, like people, like reasons why people would do something like this.
Oh my goodness.
And even within, being a vegetarian, there's very different, I guess, reasons why people would choose to do it. I guess for my own personal reasons, because I'm in school as a student veterinarian, so I'm here for the wellness of animals. So I guess part of that logic for me, I was like, well, if I'm here to help protect animals and look for their well-being, so yeah, being a vegetarian, I guess for my own personal reasons to do it, I would say one, I'm going into the profession of being a veterinarian where the welfare is for animals. So for my personal thoughts, I think if I'm there to protect animals, I probably shouldn't consume them. And then on top of that, I guess some of my other reasons would have to deal with environmentalism. So trying to lower my carbon footprint, and being a vegetarian, you can lower your carbon footprint by not consuming meat. So those are, I guess, some of the reasons why I chose to be a vegetarian.
Interesting. I want to come back in a moment to you, Emmy. First, let's go back to Poujix. So first of all, Poujix, as far as I'm concerned, you're also a vegetarian. However, you happen to have chicken twice per day, right?
Well, I wouldn't consider myself a vegetarian, but my meat consumption is very minimal amongst, omnivores, I would say. Yeah, probably.
Interesting. And by minimal, exactly what are you referring to? Like, how minimal is it?
You're right. Very rarely I do consume cow meat or red meat in general. Often the only type of meat that I consume is chicken because I don't like fish, for example. This doesn't have any reasoning behind it. Most is because chicken, amongst meats, chicken is best compatible with my digestive system. I feel like it feels better when when I'm consuming meat. I feel best when I'm consuming chicken.
Interesting. So let's now talk about vegetarianism, basically, and how it affects your life. So, Emmy, you've been a vegetarian for over 7 years now. And
we can't hear you.
Hold on a second. You guys are there?
Sorry, Dan, you got cut off. Can you repeat that? Yeah, can you repeat your question?
That's right, for sure. What I want to ask you guys right now is about the impact of vegetarianism on your body, your health, and how it functions, basically. So let me go back to Emmy here. So, Emmy, how do you describe the impact of vegetarianism on your body first? We'll talk about the reasons why you basically chose this path of life and whether or not it's actually moral. But first, let's talk about how it actually affects your body. So how do you think your body's been affected by vegetarianism?
For sure. So I guess, and then also too, when becoming a vegetarian, you do have to kind of take into account, what the things that you're maybe lacking nutritionally by cutting out meat, strictly. So I think some of the usual concerns, deals with anemia or, blood iron levels, as well as B12, because those are things that you're more easily going to obtain from meat. So I definitely, there definitely was a bit of an adjustment. So I donate blood regularly. So one of the things that you usually check is my blood iron levels. But since being vegetarian, my blood iron level, my hemoglobin has dropped barely 2 points. And that's because through other vegetables, you can find ways to supplement that. And the same thing with B12. Now, compared to vegans, they might have a harder time with B12. Which is a very important vitamin to have, but I can still obtain that through eggs. So we're drawing the line, I guess, between what an animal is and what's an animal product. I would say and like chicken eggs fall more into the animal products. So that's still something that I can consume to get my nutrients. But otherwise, eating heavy meats like red meat, for example, can actually cause like more stress on the body. Anything that's extremely high in protein does put more stresses on the body, as it is harder to break down, which can lead to things like inflammation. So they do find that eating less meat in your diet leads to lower levels of inflammation. And studies have also shown that meats like pork and red meat can be considered carcinogenic. So that is something that is good by cutting out or cutting back on in your diet.
Interesting. So you actually feel healthier now after 7 years of being a vegetarian. But in terms of, like you mentioned about, protein and stuff, because let's be honest, let's say you are into fitness, for example. I don't know if you do fitness, by the way.
I do a fair amount of fitness, or I've like at least looked into it, so I know how big protein is in regards to that.
That's right. So let's just say you are doing fitness and you want to like build muscles and stuff, right? Like that. So in that condition, don't you think that being a vegetarian might put you at a disadvantage here, and becomes almost impossible to build any substantial amount of muscles, for example?
So I think that is a big, actually, like misconception towards vegetarians and vegans, that they aren't able to access like protein, so they aren't able to build muscle. But there are surprisingly a lot of plant-based proteins that are able to give just as much or even more protein in terms of meat. And, because of the forms of it, like it can be easier to digest. So compared to red meat, which is really bigger stress in the digestive system. And then when you look at things like, there's milk proteins, tofu is always a good one. Beans and lentils are always a great source, like a substantial source of protein. Even nuts can definitely help out with that source. So, and I've even seen like bodybuilding vegans. So it's definitely not an impossible feat.
You saw a bodybuilder who was a vegan? Oh my goodness.
Yes,
it's just so hard to believe that. Oh my goodness. Wow. And one question, you mentioned bodybuilding, by the way. So think of, for example, the supplements that are quite commonly used by bodybuilders, whey proteins, for example, aminos, and what other stuff that you use, basically. Does that basically, from your perspective, does that mean that, let's say you're a vegetarian, can you actually consume those material, or that also is considered somehow not vegetarian?
So whey protein would be something as a vegetarian can consume, because it's isolated from milk. So that one, but as for a vegan, which they don't consume animal products, like anything like whey or milk originated would not be something they can have. But yeah, there's a lot of even I guess like more on the synthetic side or like extracted from plants. Like there is a lot more sources that don't need to come from animals. And then when you think about it, it is much a like easier way to extract, because when you're getting protein from animals, the animals had to eat something in order to build that protein. So really, we're just kind of cutting out the middleman by getting it directly from plants. Wow.
Interesting. So let's go back to Poujix here. How do you think vegetarianism, for example, or other forms, other extreme forms, just like being a vegan or something, can affect your health as well as your physical functions?
Right. I mean, what I personally again, I don't consider myself a vegetarian, so I don't want to be any confusion there, especially for the people who know me that hear this and be like,
dude, you're a vegetarian. Like, you're having chicken 3 times a day. God damn it. All right.
So just to clear that, but you know what? In general, I'm all for whatever you do. I'm all for moderacy. So, as I mentioned, for example, sometimes, some sources are much easier to gain. By the way, I was vegetarian, so I have some knowledge in the area a long time ago, for like a year or so.
Hold on, Skinny. You're saying that you were a vegetarian for over a year?
Yeah.
I didn't know about this? Oh my goodness. How could you, seriously, like, how did you do that, man? Behind my back or something?
This was a long time ago, by the way. This was like, actually, I don't know, like 5-6 years ago-ish. I don't know.
Oh
anyway,
my
so
goodness.
I was just trying it out. It was a hype around me, so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to give it a try, see what it is.
Wow. So for one full year, you were a vegetarian. For 1 full year.
Yeah, thereabouts. I don't, like maybe 13 or 14 months. I don't remember exactly, but
oh my goodness.
Around 1 year.
Interesting.
Yeah. The problem was I really liked my chicken, so I couldn't.
That's right, man.
Anyway, just not getting off topic for what you asked me. So my point is, there are some things that you might be lacking if you do not supplement, but there are always ways, at least with vegetarianism. I don't know about vegans. I don't have much information about that. But then for vegetarians, people who don't consume meat itself, I think there's like plenty of ways to supplement things that you would get from meat easier on a day-to-day basis, that you might not consume a lot of nuts, for example, on your day-to-day, but then you can, if you're not eating meat, then you can add those to your diet. I mean, I'm just saying nuts just as an example, lots of other things too. But I guess you gotta do some consideration, some changes, as not just stop eating meat. So I think it's very very smart to consult with somebody or read up on it or something. Yeah.
Interesting. So now you guys are talking about vegetarianism, but I think that's still a lot more, acceptable than, let's say, being a vegan, right? Because I think that is just, from my perspective, seems a little bit odd. So, Emmy, what do you think about the other extreme forms of approach towards diet? What do you think, like a vegan, for example? Like, they never consume anything. Or I even heard one of my friends, I think, was a vegan, and he said, I don't even wear the products that contain, let's say, animal skin or whatever it is. So what do you think about these like vegans? I mean, are they just is it like a cult or something where these guys have their own religion? I mean, like, what's the purpose of being a vegan, for example?
I guess you could say, like, with anything, like the hardcore, like, meat eaters, like, you could say that's a kind of, like, I won't give up my steak. Like, that's just as much as the vegan. But, I feel with when you get into veganism, and when, it's kind of, I would say it's almost like a spectrum. Like, there isn't a clear cut definition of what a vegan is. So yeah, you can start off with, like, not having any animal byproducts in your diet, but then you expand that to, not wearing leather or any kind of, like, animal, like, materials. And then you can even expand that further to, I won't wear clothing that isn't fair trade because of the workers who are put through that stress of picking the cotton and you know what I mean? It's kind of like there's almost an endless kind of definition of what can be considered being a vegan. I feel like it comes more from, like, a moral standpoint, as much of, like, it gets past the nutritional and diet aspects and leads more into the moral standpoint of, is it right to consume this or to buy this, or is it right to have this in my diet? Like, having that knowledge of, like, what, how it got to on your plate. So I think that's kind of where it comes from, and maybe just, like, having a little bit more empathy towards the animals, or, like, the workers who, like, had to go through with, like, getting these animals. So I guess that was where I kind of see how veganism is and where it's kind of come from.
Interesting. So you mentioned the moral aspect of the issue, and let me just ask both of you guys a question. From your perspective, as a vegetarian who basically has stick to this diet for over 7 years now, is there anything wrong or immoral about, for example, having meat, red meat, let's say chicken? Do you think there's something wrong with it?
I mean, if you look at it, like, biologically, like, no, like, a human, like, we've evolved, like, from being omnivores, like, consuming meat. And, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that idea. I think more the issues of it comes from, like, how in society we obtain our meat. So if you look into, like, it's basically mass production, like factory farms, where thousands of animals are confined to very small spaces, don't have, like, don't have the best quality of life when you think of, like, how these animals were raised and how they had their social constructs. There's a lot of stuff that we've had to change for them in order for us to have the supply of meat. So nothing is wrong for humans to eat meat per se. I just think that the demand and the amount that we as, like, a society, like, we as, like, a species are demanding is kind of unethical. So that's where I kind of draw.
So the new approach, the modern approach towards producing the meat on a mass scale, that's what is bothering you. So Poujix, what do you think about the moral aspect of the issue? I mean, do you think there's anything wrong with eating meat as a modern citizen of this? Let's say, I don't know, your guys are in Canada, for example. Let's say in the Middle East or wherever. Right. So do you think there's something inherently wrong with eating meat in this world?
Yeah, I would on this notion, I would agree with Em. There's nothing inherently wrong about that per se. When you very specifically handpick the situation, and I do consider the mass production of meat, for example, because that clearly is an issue. I mean, from very different standpoints. One of them would be moral, but at the same time, it's not really healthy for the consumer of the meat either. I mean, there were some studies done. I don't know how valid necessarily they are, but then the impact that the stress of the environment has on the animals has a form on their meat that you consume effectively. the hormones that they produce affect us. Em might know better on this matter, but then that could be also an issue on its own, a health issue rather. Even if it's not a moral issue for you, it could become a health issue for you. And let's face it, like in terms of moral, I mean, if you're eating that animal, why not actually give it the time that it's living, a time that is proper to a being, and a live being, and it's not in a very I want to say unhuman, but it's not about it's about like a living thing experiences things that while you're putting it in that very bad environment, it's not a good experience for that being, right? And it comes to the debate of how much they understand. I mean, they understand something, anyways. So I think that personally bothers me a little bit. Yeah, for sure.
Interesting. So let me just ask a question for both of you right now. Of course, it's an argument. So you're saying it's wrong, it's unethical to, let's say, kill an animal and then to eat it or something. So how about all these animals are being killed by, let's say, predatory animals like lions and tigers and whatever? So I mean, why not us? Why we let these delicious, let's say, animals be eaten by these predators, and why humans can't have them?
That's why I said inherently there's no problem with that. And I don't have a problem if you want to, for example, every once in a while go for hunting or whatever. And then that's my personal moral standpoint, by the way. I mean, that's what I think. But when you actually go and create these factory farms that treat animals in a certain way from the birth to the time that you kill them, that's where I draw the line, sort of. Because, well, you go for hunting, at least the animal is free and doing its thing until you hunt it, which is sort of natural in nature. And I understand that. Again, a lot of people take issues with that too. But then my point is that's where I personally draw the line. So
interesting. Good point.
I cannot answer your question because I agree with you.
Let me just find out what Emmy thinks.
Yeah. I guess kind of to add on what he's saying. So, I think the difference, like when we look at a predator in the wild and us, like does, for example, in your scenario, the lion, does the lion have enough like conscious awareness of what it's doing? Like, does it understand that it's taken a life and what that actually means for the animal that it's killing? Like, can it have this kind of rationale when, going on a hunt? Whereas we kind of have you can argue what levels are not, but at least we as a species are aware of like our conscious choices and our conscious decisions to do that. I think that's kind of where we get into this, where it actually becomes more of like a moral / ethical issue. Whereas for like other animals, it might not have the same kind of weight or guilt in that. And then too, when you think about what we're doing now with eating meat, it's not the same as hunting as it was like back then when we had to like go and scour for our food. When we have it set up in this kind of system, it's leading to a lot of other issues as well, not just moral in the sense, but there's a lot more impacts that we have to.
Interesting. Good point. So, so far, I heard basically what Emmy said about this matter and how this could actually lead to some other moral issues, because we as humans, we know what we're doing to these animals, especially when we, keep them in these small cages and whatnot for hours, then we kill them and stuff. So it's a difficult issue, of course, for everybody. But now let's talk a little bit about how we can actually deal with vegetarianism in our day-to-day lives, because up until now, we talked about the moral aspect of it, of course, as well as the health aspect. Quite frankly, based on what Emmy said, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a vegetarian, because you can always get that protein and other vitamins with the help of countless supplements in the market, most of which can actually be consumed by vegetarians. Although personally, while I appreciate vegetarianism, I don't really understand vegans very much. I just think of them as a bunch of cultists, like the Ku Klux Klan. If you know, guys, we have those in the U.S. as well. These guys are crazy. They wear these weird stuff on their head. I mean, it's pretty weird, basically.
God.
So overall, I just think of that to be like total cultist BS. But still, let's just focus now on how we can actually make vegetarianism a part of our life. So right now, I mean, you're a vegetarian. Let's talk about how you actually incorporate and embed vegetarianism into your life. Let's say you want to go out with your friends, with your partner or something, and you want to order something. Like, is your partner, by the way, is he also vegetarian?
Yeah, so he's actually just recently transitioned to full vegetarianism.
I'm guessing that's not because he liked it, because he had no other friggin' choice, I guess, right?
Actually, you'd be surprised. I'm pretty lenient. Like, with other people, like, you know, I guess I think with some people, especially, I think vegans are always the prime example that vegans are kind of like shove it down your throat, like you got to do this and like can't do anything else. Where for us, and like I guess over the course of our relationship, I just kind of like, you know, explained my reasoning for it, let him kind of do his own research into it, and he kind of came to a similar conclusion as me. So yeah, I was not twisting his arm like
that's right. Very well.
Still having it for a while.
Interesting. So right now you guys are both basically, of course, vegetarian, but let's just talk about how you can make it part of your life. Because let's be honest, vegetarians are inevitably the minority of the population. So not everybody is a vegetarian. This means you will have probably difficulty finding restaurants or ordering, the kind of food that you want. So how difficult is it to be a vegetarian these days?
I would say, like, you know, when I first started out, it was definitely much harder. And I think it was because, like, before coming to my university, I wasn't a vegetarian. I think I had tried, you know, a few times, but just, like, given, like, yeah, the opportunities, like, it was really hard for me to, like, shop vegetarian or, like, go to places. But actually, like, I'm seeing it more and more now. It seems to be picking up. Like, even, I'm sure, like, recent controversies sound so silly, but A&W introduced a veggie burger.
Wow.
You know, which was kind of, like, I guess,
a
was kind of a big deal
burger?
For, like, a main,
what kind of burger is that? What is a veggie burger, by the way? I'm curious.
I would say it's just any kind. Like, there's actually like several different varieties that I'm aware of. So some of them can be like tofu based and kind of like a patty form. Some are like beans. Some are mushroom.
Wow.
And really, it's like as long as you season it. There's even a form of it's called seitan, which is basically pure gluten, but that's also like a form of like meat substitute. So.
I like the way you pronounce seitan. I'm guessing it's the food of the Satan, obviously. I mean, that's going to be so tough to eat, man. I'm telling you. Imagine, like, you get the burger and you expect the meat and then boom, there's nothing. Oh, no, darn, shoot Satan. Goddamn devil. I got my meat. So it's pretty difficult, I know. But overall, despite all of these things, are you saying, like, let's say when you're doing your grocery, for example, like, is there like any sector for like vegetarians, like in every grocery store that you find, or you got to have like your own favorite spots to go shopping?
Yeah, I would say that there's like now like much more like of a like the section's actually probably expanded with the amount of like vegetarian / vegan options, and you know not just like a brick of tofu, like, you know, eat this. It's like, you know, they have things like like almost like vegan cold cuts. Like it's crazy. And, you know, that this thing, I'm like, I haven't eaten meat in 7 years, but I was kind of confused. I was like, is this actually turkey? Like, did we read the label right? You know, like they're getting pretty creative with.
Wow. That's amazing. I like it. That's pretty cool.
And I think you might like this tidbit too, but like with researchers, there's a lot of things of trying to produce lab grown meat. So it's basically still the exact same proteins that you would obtain from an animal, just without the actual animal. It's just like purely, it's like grown in a dish. You know, they're hoping to introduce something like that in the future, or at least there's talks about it.
Wow. Interesting. Poujix, what do you think about this matter in terms of the ease of basically becoming a vegetarian? You yourself, you're a dude, of course. Do you think it's easier for guys to be vegetarians, or do you think it's actually easier for girls, or there's no difference here? Like the gender makes no difference at all?
I mean, it shouldn't make a difference for sure. But I think, it might be my bias. I don't know. But I think it's actually at least more commonly seen by me within a female population.
That's right.
I'm not saying it's easier. I'm saying it's, I notice more females being vegetarian rather than males. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's easier. Maybe it's not.
I mean, the total number of vegetarians that I know that are men are between 0 and 0. There are none. Like literally, I don't know a single dude who is actually vegetarian. I know one vegan guy who totally looks cultist, dude. Like that guy's a creep. But generally speaking, like every vegetarian I know is a woman. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Like I know. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I can totally see this linking into kind of like gender norms, where it's like. It's weird that almost meat is seen as a masculine like food item.
I think so, kind of like that, yeah.
Think of how it's like portrayed in commercials, and like, you know, hungry man, like gotta have a steak and eggs. Like it just seems like a much more masculine thing.
Gotta go shoot down my meal. I'm gonna grab that thing and go right there. Yeah, that's right. I kind of get that style.
Yeah,
it comes from a lot of guys.
Right, I guess in that sense, because if you will, I mean, I'm using this word very hesitantly, but because maybe it's a little bit frowned upon within males, maybe it's a little bit more difficult to be a male vegetarian because everybody would like be, oh, where's your masculinity, whatever. Maybe.
That's right.
I can see that.
Interesting.
Also, too, I think there's like a fear with soy, so like tofu or other soy-based products, because within them they contain like phytoestrogens.
Exactly.
It's basically, it's a hormone similar to estrogen, so they're like, oh, I'm gonna grow like boobs if I eat this.
And I let me just tell you something, Emmy. I got to tell you, because I had a friend of mine who was a bodybuilder, and he actually consumed a tremendous amount of soy and soy products. Like literally, he cooked it, he fried it, all this kind of stuff. And I'm not kidding, but this guy began to look a little bit feminine on the down there, and of course, even on in his chest area. So it was like a little bit, kind of like I got scared a little bit, because he mentioned there's a tremendous amount of protein in these stuff, but he kind of looked a little bit funny, I'm telling you. So maybe these things do have an impact, but overall, we have to consider those.
And like there is like the phytoestrogens are something to take into account. And again, like with any kind of stuff like nutrition, or like you have to take it into moderation. So just as much as like I wouldn't overdo like the phytoestrogens in so you got to switch up the proteins, right? So you can't just rely fully on tofu, and then just the same as like you wouldn't fully rely on red meat, you kind of switch it up. So
interesting.
As long as you get like a healthy balance.
That's right. Very well. So, I mean, so far we talked about this whole vegetarianism. I want to ask you two very tough questions. Both cases, I want to see your reaction here. Case number one, imagine, right now it's been about 7 years that you are meat-free, let's call it that. So for 7 years, and let's say that next time you have a lunch or dinner or something, someone accidentally puts some meat in it and you don't notice. And then they tell you, dude, or ladies, sorry about that, but I'm sorry, I just put some meat in it, right? How would you feel if you realized the meal that you just had was actually non-vegetarian, had a lot of meat in it, and you didn't even notice it?
So, okay. I mean, if it was like purely accidental and not like some people who was like, she's vegetarian, screw her, I'm going to sneak that in here. Like that, if that, I would be definitely upset. I'd be like, that's kind of a dick move. Like, why would you do that?
That's right.
But if it was purely accidental, it's definitely happened once before. I was like eating a slice of pizza and I thought it was just cheese, but someone had snuck a pepperoni underneath. I'm like, what the heck? Who puts pepperoni under the cheese? I was like,
that's right. Interesting.
I would either from depending on how much I consumed, I would definitely feel like, I don't think I would, go into the nearest bathroom and chuck it up. Although like intentionally, I would feel bad, definitely. But, I don't feel like it. I feel like my behavior, like my thoughts are like have much more weight than the actual action of eating the food. At the end of the day, like I still have those things. And if it was like not intentional, but my body might say otherwise. So part of the thing about being vegetarian, like when you're eating meats, you need certain enzymes in your body to break down those specific meat proteins. So if I haven't eaten it for so long, your body says, well, why am I bothered making these enzymes? I stopped making them. So if I then suddenly reintroduce that meat, my body wouldn't know what to do with it. So that would definitely lead to some like indigestion problems later on.
Interesting. Very well. Second question. You've been hungry for a long time. You're in a foreign country. You don't know where the vegetarian section is. You don't even speak the language. And all of a sudden, the only option that is available to you right now, you haven't eaten in like a day or something, right? You're starving.
Right.
And then the only option available is something with meat. What would you do in that case?
I mean, in that case, it's the same thing. Like you drop me off in the woods, like, if it's between like do or die, I'll do.
Interesting.
It's a tough call. And I think too, part of it, like depending on where I am, and I think like if I was in a foreign country and let's say somewhere very different, and like I would think then that part of like the way that meat was acquired, I would think is very different from our Western civilization. You know what I mean? I would feel like it's like more localized community, like local farms. So that would be something I could probably morally get behind instead of like walking into a McDonald's.
Fantastic. That's good. So far you have no problem trying it sometimes. And you said like in the past 7 years you haven't tried, like you have not tried anything with meat in the past 7 years, not even once, right?
So actually, now that you say that, I guess this actually ties into situation number 2. I did have.
I knew it. Every vegetarian, I fucking knew it, man. I'm telling you, I knew it. Even the vegan guy. Do you remember that vegan guy I told you about? The cultist? He actually once tried a lot of chicken with me. It was amazing. That's right.
It was literally just like I shared like an appetizer which had some salmon in it because the fisherman was like right across the street. He caught it like right off the shores, and like, you know, it was a very local, like small community, like less than a few hundred people. So, you know, I was like, you know what, I can support this. And I had it and I was like, okay, it was meat. Like I didn't miss it. It wasn't like, oh, why did I like, I regret this decision. It was kind of like, okay, I got it. I can move on.
That's what I'm talking about. So you had that feeling of guilt, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just had meat and I just ruined all of it. So it's kind of like that. Let's be honest, like going on a diet basically. And, not long ago, I talked to one of my friends actually, and he said the same thing. He was trying this weird all vegetable thing. And it was like very difficult for him for like almost, 40 days. He tried it and he's like, dude, I was hungry all the time. And that's one of the challenges, of course, I can actually go through. So let's move on back to Poujix here about yourself. So you have tried it also for almost a year. And let's say that during that period that you tried vegetarianism, did you actually have any, like, let's call it I don't know, like vegetarian relapse or something where you actually start eating something?
So for the duration that I was actually deciding to try this out, honestly, not that I know of. Again, if it wasn't the food and I didn't notice, I don't know. So to the extent of my knowledge, no, and I didn't intentionally go for it for that period of time. And the reason, first of all, I want to really appreciate what Em has said here. First of all, she was being completely honest. And secondly, I really like her attitude. And the reason that I like her vegetarian philosophy is because it's literally a philosophy. And it's not just, I just want, because everybody else is doing it, I'm just going to be a vegetarian and it's nice, it's fancy or whatever. So, and with that philosophy, it fits if she goes to that tiny village or whatever and then decides, okay, I'm going to try it out, and that's fine. It's not like I'm committing a sin and I'm going to lose heaven or I'm going to go to hell or something. So I really appreciate that, first of all. And secondly, the reason that I didn't have that relapse, first of all, it's relatively short, like 1 year is really manageable. Secondly, because I was really trying it out, basically. I was trying to get a sense of what I'm doing, in my life and trying these different diets. This was one of them. So yeah, I didn't have any relapse in that sense.
Fantastic. That's great. So, since we're running out of time here, let me just ask you guys one final question because, we are a futurist podcast, right? And let us talk about the future of vegetarianism as well as other forms of cultist behavior like being a vegan. Again, that's what I personally think about this matter, quite frankly. So Ku Klux Klan, that's pretty amazing. But what do you think about the future?
I think you have a very strong feeling about it.
Dude, this guy was weird. This guy was really weird, man. This guy was weird. I don't know what to say about this guy. But anyways.
Maybe he was a cult person. I don't know.
I don't know, man. So let's now talk because
anyways,
that's right. Because let's be honest, guys, our diets are changing. For example, let's be honest, like merely a century ago, like things like smoking in public were like quite common, and now it's all a taboo. So let's talk about the future direction. Like, do you think like vegetarianism could become the diet of the future where like everybody somehow becomes a vegetarian and like people are like, dude, you eat so much meat, that's so bad or something. So what do you think about the future of vegetarianism? And do you think people in the future are going to be more vegetarian or less from your perspective? Let's start first with Emmy here.
So yeah, I would say like continuing the trend, like, before you look back a couple decades, like veganism or like vegetarianism was basically non-existent. I think this trend, like even not even just like people like deciding to become vegetarian or vegan. I feel like it'll have to be like more of like an only option. Like when you're looking at where things are going in the world with like global warming and climate change, like a big impact of that is the like meat production industry. We also have issues like things like antimicrobial resistance, which arises from giving antibiotics to these animals that are factory farmed and caged in small confinement. So there's a lot of impacts to our future, which is based on the amount of consumption of meat. And so I feel like we're going to have to come up with more ways to, reduce that, which could be becoming vegetarian or vegan or coming up with alternative methods like, lab meat or any kinds of like cruelty-free meat substitutes. So I definitely see this becoming more of the popular, like almost more of the norm, definitely in the future.
Fantastic. So Poujix, the future of vegetarianism, the future of this particular approach towards our diet.
Right. I was actually literally going to go the same direction because we didn't really discuss the impacts that the meat production has on our climate. And for that very reason, I think we have to, like we are, and we have to further make a lot of conscious choices to pivot from this trend because of if you want to help our climate, basically. And for that reason, I think, I'm not going to say like we're going to be meat free and meat will be frowned upon. I don't think that's going to happen. Again, this is just purely guess, but that would not be my guess that happens. I think the meat and consumed meat would be way different in the trajectory that we are seeing we're going, perhaps.
Interesting. And by the way, you mentioned something about the impact of meat production on the environment. And I once, I heard of pretty weird statistics about like how much of our pollution these days is actually caused by like cows or something. So what are the exact statistics about the impact of meat production on the environment?
I don't particularly remember the exacts. Yeah, go for it.
I think it's about, they say the statistics is somewhere like 25% of all like emissions is caused like either directly or indirectly through like production and like meat farming. Wow. So that's like more than like all the cars and like any other kind of automobile when you think about it.
So you're saying that if we cut off meat production, we're going to literally reduce the entire world emission by 25%.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
somewhere
amazing.
Around that number.
That's amazing.
So you think of like the animals themselves, like cows are a big contributor because methane, which is actually a much more dangerous emission than carbon dioxide, and then all the machines and stuff related to, housing these animals and getting all the crops for them and the water for them. It's a lot of resources to produce meat, which is like, you could feed like almost like, I think they say somewhere like 3.5 billion people with all the crops that we use to feed animals.
Wow.
So you think in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of reasons why having like cattle and other kinds of animals is actually doing like much more harm at the amount of demand that we have currently, especially in the States and Canada.
Great point to figure. We got just somehow in the future, I think this will play a huge role. Of course, there are certain politicians like Donald Trump who believe that global warming doesn't exist or something like this. But obviously, this is a serious matter to be considered for everybody. So now we're going to time here. Let's try to actually wrap up our conversation and reach a conclusion. First, you, Poujix, after all that we talked today about vegetarianism, meat production, all that stuff, what is now your final comment?
I mean, honestly, for the people who are not vegetarian, I wouldn't really say you definitely should be vegetarian because I'm not. First of all,
and you love the chicken, don't you?
I sort of do. I don't know.
Take my life, but don't take my goddamn chicken. I want it. Take my life already. Okay.
Something like that. But so my point is like, try to make. You might have tried it or not, but I would say try to make a conscious decision of reducing meat. Honestly, it feels better when I have. First of all, you're forced to have a lot of other stuff that has other health benefits that meat doesn't give you. First of all, because you need nutrition and then you need calories basically, and if you're not eating meat, you have to supplement it somehow. So that's the first impact that it has. Secondly, as Em mentioned, specifically with red meats and like some specific types of proteins, it's much harder to break down. It puts a lot of stress on the body, and that also depends on who you are in terms of. Some people are more compatible with heavy protein meats, and some are not. So it might actually relieve some stress from your body. You might feel better. Just give it a try. I don't think it hurts. Just like very open-minded. Go to it very open-minded, and then try it out. See what happens.
All right. So you said it doesn't hurt. If I tried it and it did hurt, I'll come find you. All right. Very nice. All right, let's move on now to Emmy here. Emmy, what is your final thought about this discussion?
Yeah, so I think also like relating to what Poujix said, coming as me being a vegetarian, I'm not going to say like you have to be vegetarian. I mean, the same struggles that people might have becoming vegetarian is probably like a similar struggle as me like transitioning to be a full vegan. Like it's a lot to give up, and it's a lot to like try to adjust to. But for the people that, are thinking about like, what does it mean to be vegetarian, or maybe vegetarianism is not for me, there's other ways to do it too. Like you don't have to completely scrap meat. Some of the suggestions I would say is like maybe just like reduce it to like maybe once or twice a week instead of having it every day. Or, then just cutting out red meat, I would say, is probably like better than anything, like just having chicken or other like maybe fish instead. But cutting out red meat and just reducing the consumption of meat you have definitely has like beneficial impacts instead of like, if you can't do full vegetarianism.
Amazing. And with that, we come to the end of the show. We're out of time here. So I want to thank both you, Poujix and Emmy, for your great contributions. Great ideas. I loved it. Of course, for the time being, I remain as a vegetarian who also happens to have chicken twice per day, but maybe in the future I will consider it. And of course, if it hurt, Poujix, I'll come find you, man. I'm telling you. All right. I literally look all around Toronto, just find you basically. Where's this guy who says it doesn't hurt? All right. But joke aside, it was a very, very interesting discussion. I loved it. I want to thank you, Emmy, for being here for the second time. Appreciate it.
For sure. No, this is great.
And of course,
you guys wanted to hear that.
That's right. And of course, you, Poujix, you're the man originating the whole thing. Thank you so much for this. And if you're currently listening to us on, let's say the browsers, dude, I mean, come on, seriously, we are living in the 21st century. Just right now, go ahead and download either Google Play or try to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, because that will give you the best chance to get those shows as soon as they're made available. And of course, that will also give us a chance to be rated on iTunes as well as Google Play. So please help us with this one. Going to help us to actually reach a wider audience. This was all the time we have for. My name is Daniel Mulligan, and this was Beyond the Present Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and have a good one.